I do identify as a recovered antisemite because I want especially Jews to understand that there is hope. The situation is terrible. Everybody knows that since October 7th, anti-Semitism is on the rise everywhere you look. However, by identifying as a recovered anti-Semite, I remind people that transformation is possible, that indoctrination is what leads to this obsessive hatred, and this is not the end of the story. We need to have faith, roll our sleeves up, and do something about it, contribute our bit, each in their own capacity. I just learned recently that 1 in 8 Americans has met a Jew, which means 7 of 8 have never spoken to a Jew, let alone an Israeli. That is to say, a lot of people do not know much about Israel and about the Jews except conspiracy theories. And this is the case where I grew up. Indeed, I was born in Damascus and I grew up in Lebanon, where I spent the first 18 years of my life. I also lived in Saudi Arabia. I lived in a few countries, and I've been living in Germany for 13 years. And I can compare the Arab world to Europe, for example. And in the Arab world, we have no more Jews to contest whatever is said about them. For those who don't know, more than 850,000 Jews were uprooted from the Arab world because they were intimidated or persecuted. At a certain point, they decided to leave, like they were professions they were no longer allowed to exercise after the Arab world lost this war against Israel or that war against Israel, so they would take it out on them. And sometimes there were pogroms, they were lynched. So more than 850,000 left the Arab world. We have never spoken to a Jew. We're not allowed to speak to Israelis by law. We have, in most of the Arab world, anti-normalization laws and policies forbidding people-to-people contact between the citizens of those countries and Israelis, even abroad. So as a Lebanese, you meet an Israeli in Australia, you're not allowed to speak to them. And if you do go back to your country, you'll be persecuted. I also attended the French Catholic school, so I was exposed to a different kind of anti-Semitism, European Christian anti-Semitism, and the narrative that says the Jews killed Jesus. So this is where I grew up, and that is why I was an anti-Semite. It is important to also mention, and this is relevant today, that Lebanon, where I grew up, was occupied by the Israelis. So the Israeli army occupied South Lebanon, and I myself was one of Hezbollah's biggest fans, because when I was a teenager, and I was not the only one, we saw Hezbollah as heroes who dared defy the Israeli occupier. Of course, nobody told us that before we were born, for more than a decade, armed Palestinian factions abused Lebanese territory, Lebanese hospitality, and trained together with Islamists, but also with radical leftists from around the world, Germany, Italy, even Japan. And occasionally they would send groups to infiltrate Israeli borders by land or by sea to commit terror acts. And at a certain point, Israel was fed up, gave up on diplomacy, and decided to create a buffer zone in South Lebanon in order to prevent further infiltrations, something that did not stop until today. So instead of sending groups to blow up a bus or kidnap school children, today Hezbollah sends rockets. So those in the West who say that Israel was aggressive even before Hezbollah existed deliberately forget, omit the fact that before Hezbollah it was Palestinian armed factions, and until this day Hezbollah took over and unfortunately dragged Lebanon yet again into another war. From October 8, 2023, 11 months, Israel was attacked on a daily basis. And European countries insisted that diplomacy will sway Hezbollah, will change their mind. And after 11 months, Israel decided that only a military operation will stop this madness, because more than 200,000 Israelis had to evacuate. They were displaced and living all over Israel. And I watched this happen, and I simultaneously watched sensible Lebanese voices, politicians and journalists, activists, begging Hezbollah, not only urging, they got to a point where they're begging Hezbollah to stop, because of course Israel was going to retaliate. They do have that obligation for their citizens. If Switzerland was attacked for 11 months, they would also have to retaliate. And nobody could change Hezbollah's mind, which led to a ground operation. And until this day, we watch every day tragedies happening on both sides of the border. But you asked me about Lebanon in particular. Yes, more than 1 million people are displaced. Many, if not most, are sleeping in tents. They do not have access to toilets. It's a catastrophe. So what led to this tragedy? Not Israeli aggression, and I'm one of very, very, very few Arabs who visits Israel. I'm speaking to you now from Jerusalem, and I visited Israel 24 times since October 7th. And I know what's happening on the ground here. I have friends who are currently fighting in Lebanon. And I know that there's nothing they want more than peace with Lebanon. And every time they come back, we talk about it, and they say, what a shame. It's such a beautiful country, such a gem. At the same time, I have to commend the courage of some leaders who decided for a change to try peace with the Israelis and to conduct direct negotiations with the help of the USA. That said, I watched recently the exclusive interview the Lebanese president gave to CNN, and although we have to commend his bravery and the fact that he prioritized the well-being of the Lebanese people, I see with both eyes, and I truly disliked this move when he displayed pictures of victims, including a 3-month-old baby, and he repeated anti-Semitic tropes, and he challenged the viewers and the Israelis, was this baby an imminent threat? No, Israel does not deliberately target civilians, women and children.
You describe yourself as an Arab Zionist. What is the response you receive from the Arab community, both positive and negative?
The Arab world is vast, and the Arab world is not monolithic. The Lebanese culture is very different from the Syrian culture, very different from the Palestinian culture, from the Kuwaiti, the Saudi, the Egyptian, the Libyan, etc. How did people respond? I have to break it down. When Israel started the grand operation in Lebanon, I wanted to know, in this day and age where we have social media, where the Lebanese have access to the Israeli narrative, and even though anti-normalization laws are still applied in Lebanon, you can't arrest a Lebanese citizen for watching a reel on Instagram. But as most of my followers on Instagram were Zionists, I started a TikTok account and I posted only in Arabic to ensure that it's only Arabs watching, no English subtitles. And in 2 months, I had 60,000 followers. So I wanted to understand, do the Lebanese teenagers think today the way I used to, back in the days where we did not have social media? And I was surprised, positively surprised, because many understand that it's Hezbollah Hezbollah provoked Israel, and Hezbollah dragged Lebanon into this war to relieve Hamas in Gaza, for example. So that was the first positive surprise. And then, right after Israel signed a ceasefire with Lebanon, after the first round of fighting, the Sunni jihadists or Sunni fighters, the rebels, let's call them rebels because they're not all jihadists, but many are, mobilized and started moving from Idlib, and within 11 days they took over Damascus, and Assad, the butcher of Damascus, was toppled, overthrown, and he escaped. So I started also speaking to the Syrian society, and I was positively surprised because they were proud of me for being in Israel, for being this ambassador, this messenger, the representative of those who are so sick of war, but also so sick of the false narrative that the so-called axis of resistance solved the Arab world, claiming that they fight for a moral cause, that they're invested in the liberation of the oppressed Palestinian people. Why did the Syrian people finally understand that this was a lie? Because back in 2011, when the Arab Spring arrived in Syria, and when the Syrian people aspired to get rid of Bashar al-Assad, or originally wanted him to introduce reforms because people were incredibly poor, Hezbollah decided to send their fighters to slaughter Syrians who were demanding reforms, who wanted a better life, who wanted justice. Hezbollah turned their guns against the Syrian people and helped Assad kill tens of thousands of Syrians. This is where the Syrians understood Assad is not part of that axis of evil because they were interested in the well-being of the Palestinians. Otherwise, the Syrian regime would have treated the Syrian people better. Otherwise, Hezbollah would treat the Lebanese people better. The Iranian regime would treat the Iranians better. So people on the ground do not fall for these lies anymore, but Westerners, from the comfort of their living rooms in the West, still buy this nonsense. We don't. This was the response. This is why I started Arabs Ask, and now the page is called From Israel. And although you see most comments are negative when made by Arab speakers or Arabs, we were bombarded with positive messages who landed in our inboxes. People would say, I wish I could do what you're doing. And people would write from Cairo, from Damascus, from Tehran, and sometimes when I can see their faces and their names, I tell them, like, seriously, if you're writing to me from Tehran, I'm in Israel. Don't. It's dangerous. But people are fed up, and many have little, if anything, left to lose, so they don't care. They want the Iranian regime gone, they wanted Assad gone, they want Hezbollah gone. And when Hassan Nasrallah, ironically, when the former Secretary General of Hezbollah was killed by the Israeli Air Force, people celebrated on the streets, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Iran. And the rest of the world was lamenting this terrorist. So things are changing, and I am, by nature, an optimist person, but also based on my analysis, I think things are heading in the right direction, although it's such a painful period, and I understand that people are losing sight of the light at the end of the tunnel. If you look at what's happening around the world now, sometimes it's perplexing, confusing, frustrating, because, and I know it's a cliche, we repeated it so many times, but it's a valid one. Homosexuals, transgender, Greta Thunberg, dressed in mini shorts and a crop top on a ship, sailing to save Gazans. She wants to break the siege and go into Gaza. And that indicates to me that they do not understand ABC about our region, about Islamists. So Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. They would have a problem with you as a female arriving in mini shorts and a crop top. Or if you are transgender or homosexual, because thank God for the internet, you can look up what they would do to you, what they did to homosexuals. Hassan Nasrallah, former Secretary General of Hezbollah, was asked about homosexuals, and he said, there's no redemption, there's no going back. Once you cross that line, especially as a man, you have to be killed. So when I see groups on campuses around the world with the obviously like displaying that they are pro-life, that they support gays, they want to live the way they want, they color their hair green and purple. Obviously, they want to identify however they wish. And yet again, they champion Hamas. Or feminists who made their career, they built their reputation on championing women's rights. Suddenly, in a sick twist of events, they are supporting the IRGC. When you saw October 7th, remind me, how many women did you see unveiled on the streets of Gaza? When you see people displaced in Gaza, the poor Palestinians, these poor Gazans, when they're moving from A to B to C to D, how many unveiled women did you see? Do people know anything about domestic violence in the Middle East? And this is an argument I use with Lebanese, with Iraqis, with Syrians, who hate Israel with such passion, Egyptians. And I ask them, when they say Israel is behind all ills of the world, everything we suffer is because of Israel. And I ask them, would Israel prevent criminalizing domestic violence in Iraq or in Egypt? Is Israel opposed to introducing reforms, to improving your health system, your education system? What does Israel have to do with that? Would it prevent you from recycling? If you stop corruption in your countries, we all benefit, Israel as well. When you develop a vision, a positive and healthy vision for your future, you will resemble the UAE. And once you resemble the UAE, you partner with Israel. You would have no beef with them, but it's convenient for every dictatorship, especially in our region. Failed governance is always blamed on Israel. It's convenient to point the finger at the people who are demonized and dehumanized, because this is one way, one effective way, to deflect attention from all your failed leaders, those who inflict pain on generation after generation after generation. So I've been in Israel during the war. I do not know Israel except since October 7th. If I am anywhere in the world and missiles are dropping in Israel, I feel very nervous. When I'm in Israel and we are under attack, I'm happy, I'm safe, I don't mind my sleep being interrupted by missiles, by sirens. I wanted to be here, and I knew something big is going to happen with Iran. Again, that was my analysis, not based on information. I came one day before the war started, on the last flight before the airspace was closed, and I brought my only son with me here. And when Alal at the airport were asking me, were trying to indicate to me, like, you know something is about to happen. I'm like, yeah, I'm going for the party. And my son understood and is like, this is not funny, I'm your only child. Are you kidding me? Is a war about to start? Because he doesn't know the Middle East, he doesn't even speak Arabic, he's never been through a war. I wanted him to know what the Israelis are going through. But I also knew that he was going to be safe. We have a safe room, we have the Iron Dome, and I have a lot of faith. If I didn't have faith, I wouldn't be able to get out of bed. Because it's incredible how widespread this hatred is. Not only of Jews, but of Zionists, so of Jews and Jews and everybody who stands with them. We are targets. We're legitimate targets because we all support a genocide and we're all baby killers now. If I didn't have faith, I wouldn't have the energy to continue to carry on. So I was here, and on that Shabbat dinner, right before the war started, we were in Jerusalem, and I said, this Purim we're killing Khamenei. I had such a strong feeling that we're going after the Iranian regime because this has been in the making for decades. They are nasty and powerful, and they were allowed to grow, to proliferate for so long. And look at Hezbollah, one of the strongest proxies, the nastiest actor in the region. They are stronger than the Lebanese army. And they're not like Hamas, like those buffoons who crossed the borders into Israel wearing flip-flops. Hezbollah are ideologues. They're not in this for money. They truly think they're doing the right thing, and they're well trained. But I knew that it's time that we dealt with them. And I read what's happening, and I thought we're building towards this moment where now we have to be strong and brave, because it's not going to be short, and it's not going to be easy, and it's going to get worse, even worse. But it has to, if we're going to live in peace in the region. If we want it to get better once and for all, we have to finish this now. So we were here, and I assure you that most Israelis, the vast majority, were supportive of this war, although they were at the receiving end. Ballistic missiles were landing in Israel, not in Sydney, and they were supportive because they know, they understand that unless we get rid of this nasty Iranian regime, we cannot live in peace in the region. I'm going to use terminology that I would not use before I decided to convert. I think that during that class where I learned about Judaism for the first time, my soul recognized that Jewish tune. To me, listening to this Orthodox rabbi speak about Judaism, not even scratching the surface, given basic information, the stars aligned, and I understood that Judaism presents a completely different story than what I was told about the Creator. Judaism is realistic. You're not expected to fly to heaven. You're not expected to be a superhero. The prophets of Judaism sinned because we are human beings. I love the concept of tshuva. I mentioned it earlier, redemption, giving people a chance to make up for a mistake, to make up for a sin. We all go astray. To me, it's a recipe designed for human beings. And I raised my son an atheist. So my son challenges some of what I say. And I tell him, besides, I made up those arguments and I've thrown them at people all my life. I tell him, you don't have to believe that God gave Moses the Torah at Mount Sinai. If this wisdom is man-made and it is this old, and all it wanted is to regulate our relationship with ourselves, with heaven, with human beings, with each other, even if it's man-made, it should command your respect even more. So I find Judaism fascinating, and it helps much more than all those recipes that you find in bookstores, self-help, motivation, gratitude, etc. These concepts exist in Judaism. If you are observant, the first thing you say when you wake up, when you open your eyes, is you pay your thanks for it's acknowledging our vulnerability and how fragile life is, our life. And as human life is sacred in Judaism and it is priority, the priority, and precedes every other law, one cannot help but think, so how can we support a war? And I asked so many rabbis during my visits here to Israel, because I do support the war and I'm condemned for it. But as a realistic person who grew up in the Middle East, I know that there is no other way to deter terrorists. They're not going to give up their gun. They're not going to disarm voluntarily. Hamas is not going to disarm. Hezbollah is not going to disarm. And yes, they will use civilians who have nothing to do with this cause, including their own children who do not understand politics yet, let alone geopolitics and the holy war. They will use them to advance a political agenda or a holy war, depending on how secular or religious they are. So the only way to deter them is by using violence. That is not to say that we do not sanctify life. We do. But sometimes, in order to protect your own children, you have to take very, very, very difficult steps, make very difficult decisions. And every commander who is managing this war has to live with the consequences it entails. And it is not easy. People take it lightly when they accuse the Israelis of being warmongering. No, it's not easy. I have many friends here who are heartbroken, but you reach a point where you understand you have to be brave and you have to do the right thing, even if it's very hard. And this is all already there in the Torah. It teaches us that evil is objective. So it's not kumbaya. It's not all good. The world is balanced. Evil exists. And if October 7th hasn't proven that, I don't know what should. And we tend to forget a lot. So we need these rituals. This is why I decided to convert Orthodox. We need these reminders every day because we are human and we are weak. Can you imagine? Even the Jewish people after the Holocaust let their guard down in a way that allowed October 7th to happen. So we always need these reminders. And I find Judaism fascinating. But the notion, mostly the notion of your role, your mission being a light, you have to strive to be a light unto nations, means that the Torah is not exclusively there for the Jews. You have to take those values and bring them to the rest of the world, not to convert anybody, because Judaism differs from Christianity and Islam in that respect, definitely, but to teach them how to regulate their relations with one another. And the entire Western civilization is founded on Judeo-Christian values.
WITSO, the World International Zionist Organization, are also doing incredible work in Israel and helping with the recovery after October 7. Can you just, as a last question, tell me why it was important for you to support this organization in coming out to Australia with them?
I do not only support WITSO, I admire their work, but there are so many organizations around the world that are doing phenomenal work for Israel, helping this country stay on its feet. And I support those initiatives and admire them, not only because they're helping the Israelis, but they are supporting everything Israel stands for. This is why we stand with Israel. It's not because I'm converting to Judaism. It's not because the Israelis are cool, because they are brave and they are fighting on the front lines. On behalf of all of us, I speak publicly, but I've never carried a gun. They literally have to kiss their children goodbye before their children are sent to Lebanon, to Gaza, not knowing if they're going to see them again. There are so many orphans, so many widows, so many disabled people, so many traumatized individuals, and yet we have to still carry one another in order to make it till the end of the line. This is why WITSO has my utmost admiration because of what they do together with many other organizations to support what Israel represents in a time where every initiative, every gesture, every dollar, every word of truth is desperately needed.